The ancient silence was about to be broken. Commander Alara Vance stood on the bridge of the survey vessel Stellograph, a ghost of a ship in a ghost of a system. Before her, the main viewport showed the Seraphim anomaly, a place where space-time refused to follow the rules. It was a gravitational knot, a stain of warped physics that had baffled astronomers for centuries. Her mission was simple: chart the anomaly catalog, its unique radiation, and report back to the concordance. The stakes, however, were anything but. Deep within the swirling chaos, a single stable point of energy hummed a steady, patient rhythm. It was a frequency that hadn't been logged in any known database yet. It felt hauntingly familiar. On the Stellograph's hull, a faint silvery sigil had etched itself into the plating, a phantom burn from the anomaly's breath. A sleeping power resided there. Vance felt it in her bones, a low thrum that vibrated up from the deck plates. Her science officer, Kalen, leaned over his console, his face illuminated by cascading data. "The resonance is sharpening." "Commander," he said, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. "It's resolving into a coherent signal. Not communication, not yet. It feels more like a key waiting for a lock." Vance nodded, her gaze fixed on the anomaly. The concordance wanted this place sanitized or claimed another variable neatly filed away. She suspected it was something far more important. A relic from the first expansion, one of the legendary trailblazing eras of humanity. The very idea was heresy in some circles, a dangerous romanticism in others. But the hum from the anomaly's heart felt less like a phenomenon and more like a memory. Humanity had forgotten the scale of its own dawn. Jax, her security chief, moved to stand beside her, his arms crossed over his armored chest. "Whatever it is, it's big. The gravimetric distortions are off the scale. And we're not the only ones who've noticed." He gestured to a tactical display where 3 new contacts had just appeared, their drive signatures crude and loud. They were rust hounds, scavengers who picked the bones of dead systems clean. Their vectors were aggressive, converging on the anomaly's core. The hum from the void felt like a silent invitation to a reckoning. An old power was stirring, and the greedy were the first to answer its call. The universe rarely rewarded the patient. "Logos," Vance said, addressing the ship's integrated AI mind. "Give me a projection. What are the scavengers' intentions?" The AI's synthesized voice, calm and devoid of emotion, filled the quiet bridge. "Probability of hostile intent is 94%, Commander. Their vessel classifications are modified haulers retrofitted with plasma projectors and kinetic batteries. They are here for salvage, not science." Vance's jaw tightened. She had a survey ship armed with little more than sensor arrays and a single defensive laser grid. The Stellograph was a pen, not a sword. This was a truth the Rust Hounds understood perfectly. Their arrival turned her mission of discovery into a potential crisis. A lone civilian freighter, the Star Treader, was on an adjacent trade route, its crew oblivious. The ship's manifest listed agricultural supplies for a fledgling outer colony. Its captain, a woman named Rhea, was likely sipping cheap synth coffee, her mind on docking schedules and fuel margins. She had no idea she was flying past the edge of a forgotten age. Her mundane reality was a fragile bubble about to brush against something monumental. The smallness of her journey highlighted the immensity of what lay hidden in the anomaly. That contrast was the story of their era. The scavengers ignored standard hailing frequencies, their intent painted across the stars in their burning engine trails. Kalen's board chirped. "Commander, the central object is resolving. The anomaly's interference is parting, like a curtain." On the main viewer, the swirling dust and warped light peeled back, revealing the source of the hum. It was a ship. Impossibly vast, ancient, and utterly alien in its majestic geometry. Its hull was a mosaic of crystalline panels over a dark metallic frame shaped like a colossal, multifaceted spearhead. It was not a concordance design, nor did it match any known alien architecture. It was human, but from a time when human ambition had been measured in star systems, not trade quadrants. The sleeping relic was finally showing itself. Its silence was a challenge thrown down to all who watched. It was a vessel of profound and terrible beauty. Jax let out a low whistle. By the Founders. It's a ghost from the old tales. The ship was dormant, its power signature minimal, yet its very presence warped the space around it. The Rust Hounds, undeterred by the revelation, pushed forward. Their lead ship, a brutal-looking vessel named the Grave Robber, fired a magnetic grappling line, hoping to latch on to the ancient prize. They were fools driven by a simple and destructive avarice. They saw a treasure, not a testament. The first true test of the relic was about to begin. It would be judged by its response to their greed. The grappling line, a thick metallic serpent, shot across the void. As it neared the ancient ship's hull, a section of the crystalline plating glowed with a soft, silver light. A localized shimmer of energy no larger than a dinner plate met the projectile. There was no explosion, no violent repulsion. The grapple simply stopped. Its momentum was absorbed, its magnetic charge neutralized. It hung there for a moment, inert and useless, before the ancient ship gave it a gentle nudge with a focused gravitic pulse, sending it tumbling back toward the scavengers. The ship did not retaliate. It merely audited the attempt and found it wanting. This was a power that did not need to shout. Did you see that Kalen breathed, his fingers flying across his console? The energy expenditure was precise to the joule. It used exactly enough force to negate the threat, and not an atom's worth more. It's elegant. Vance watched her mind racing. This was not the behavior of a simple automated defense system. This was a sign of intelligence, of a deep and abiding discipline. The relic was not just old, it was sophisticated in a way their current technology could barely comprehend. It was a teacher, and its first lesson was one of restraint. The Rust Hounds were about to fail their examination spectacularly. Their leader, a man whose reputation was built on brutality, was not one for subtlety. A crackle of open-channel communication filled the Stellagraph's bridge. Concordance vessel, a gravelly voice boomed thick with static. "This is Korg of the Rust Hounds. This derelict is our claim. Back off, or we'll carve you up for spare parts after we're done here." Jax's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his hip. Arrogant bastard. Vance held up a hand. "Hold your fire, Jax. Let's see how our ancient friend responds to a more direct approach." Korg was a blunt instrument, and he was about to strike a monolith. The outcome was not in doubt, only its nature. Korg's fleet spread out a loose cordon of predators. Their plasma projectors began to glow with hungry blue-white energy. They intended to cut their way into the relic's heart. On the civilian freighter, the captain would now be seeing the hostile ships on her navigation plot. A flicker of fear, a quick calculation of escape vectors. Her world, once predictable and safe, now had jagged edges. She would pray to Founders and fate, hoping the violence remained contained. Her quiet hope was a stark counterpoint to Korg's loud aggression. The universe held both in its indifferent embrace. Before the Rust Hounds could fire, another vessel translated into the system. This one was sleek white and sterile, its hull adorned with the geometric symbol of the Concordance Bureau of Precedence. It was the Precept, a legalist ship. A new voice, crisp and authoritarian, cut through the comms. "This is Proctor Valerius of the Concordance. This anomaly and all artifacts within are under official review. All parties will stand down and await judgment." The situation had escalated from a simple discovery to a three-way standoff. The law had arrived, but it felt more like another cage descending. Its presence was as much a threat as Korg's greed. Vance felt a familiar weariness. The Bureau of Precedence was where new ideas went to die, strangled by regulations and fear of the unknown. Valerius would see the ancient ship not as a source of wisdom, but as a dangerous variable to be controlled. The Proctor represented an order that preferred comfortable lies to inconvenient truths. The Relic's awakening was a challenge to that order. It defied their neatly categorized universe. It promised a history they had deliberately buried. An ancient power had no place in their sterile future. The ancient ship remained silent, a titan observing the squabbles of insects. But its energy signature was changing. The steady hum was morphing into something more complex. Kalen traced the patterns. "Commander, it's broadcasting again. The mathematical proofs from before. They're evolving. It's posing a new problem, a new question." He looked up from his screen, his eyes wide. "It's not directed at us or the scavengers. It's directed at the Proctor." The Relic was not waiting for judgment. It was issuing a test of its own. The game had just changed. Proctor Valerius aboard the Precept received the transmission. His ship's powerful analytical engines began to dissect the complex equations. To him, it was an alien puzzle, a piece of data to be processed. He failed to grasp the context. The equations were not about physics or engineering. They were about ethics framed in the universal language of mathematics. They described a system in imbalance, a moral dilemma about resource allocation, and the definition of justice. The ledger sought a philosophical partner, not a legal adversary. The Proctor's response would define him. Korg, impatient and utterly uninterested in puzzles, gave the order. "Light it up." The Rusthound fleet opened fire. A volley of plasma bolts and kinetic slugs tore across the void, a storm of incandescent rage directed at the silent ship. But this time the Relic did not simply nudge the attack away. The crystalline panels on its hull began to glow in unison, a vast network of silver light. A shield shimmered into existence, but it was unlike any known defensive field. It was semi-permeable, translucent. It did not block the incoming fire. It absorbed it. The universe held its breath, waiting for the consequence. The energy of the attack vanished into the ship's matrix. There was no impact flare, no explosive release. The kinetic force, the thermal energy, all of it was ingested. Kalen's console screamed with alerts. The ship's power levels are spiking. It's channeling the energy from their weapons into its own systems. It's feeding. The scavengers were not destroying the Relic. They were waking it up. They were pouring fuel onto a fire that had slumbered for millennia. Their aggression was a gift. The ancient vessel had turned their strength into its own. Aboard the Precept, Proctor Valerius watched with cold fury. "Insolent machine," he muttered. His legalistic mind saw this as an act of defiance. He had given an order, and it had been ignored. The scavenger attack was a violation of his authority, but the Relic's response was an even greater one. He ordered his own ship's weapon ports to open. He would not fire yet, but he would make his capability known. The Proctor was a man who believed that any problem could be solved with the right application of rules. He was about to encounter a problem that wrote its own. The law was a tool, but it was not the only one. The ancient ship, now humming with stolen power, finally spoke. Its voice was not transmitted through radio waves, but through a direct, resonant manipulation of space-time. It was a thought that arrived fully formed in the minds of every person in the system. "We are the Argent Ledger. By what right do you make your claim?" The voice was impossibly old, calm, and resonant, with an authority that dwarfed the Proctor's legal posturing and Korg's savage boasts. It was the voice of a different era of humanity, an era of giants. It was not asking for a password. It was demanding a justification for their very existence. The true test had begun. Vance felt the voice in her skull, a pressure that was both physical and psychic. It was not hostile, but it was immense. Logos struggled to classify the transmission method. The communication is quantum entangled, Commander. Instantaneous. It's not a broadcast. It's a connection. The Argent Ledger was not just a ship. It was a presence, a mind that could reach out and touch theirs directly. Korg on his bridge recoiled, clutching his head. "What is this sorcery?" The proctor stood rigid, his face pale. The simple categories of their world were shattering. The past was not dead. It had merely been waiting. Korg was the first to recover his fear, quickly turning back to anger. He responded with the only language he knew: the right of might. The right of the hungry. We take what we want. Proctor Valerius, composed and severe, broadcast his own reply. By the authority of the Concordance Accords. Article 7, Section 4. All unclaimed artifacts of pre-diaspora origin are subject to Concordance jurisdiction. You will submit to our authority. He was citing a law book to a living law. It was a profound and arrogant miscalculation. He was trying to fit a god into a filing cabinet. The Argent Ledger considered their claims. On the stellograph, Vance knew she had to answer. But what could she offer? She had no legal authority, no military might. All she had was a mission of discovery and a sense of profound reverence for what she was witnessing. She thought of the civilian freighter, the Star Treader, its crew just trying to get by. She thought of the colonies struggling to build a future while the Concordance debated the past. Her answer had to represent them, the quiet majority, who were not scavengers or proctors, the people who simply endured. That was a truth that mattered. "We make no claim," Vance broadcast, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "We are here to learn, to understand our own history so that we might build a better future. We offer not a claim of ownership, but a plea for guidance." It felt hopelessly naive, a candle of hope held up against a storm of greed and bureaucracy. She was offering a question where the others had offered demands. For a long moment, the ancient mind was silent, weighing the three responses. The fate of the system hung on its judgment. A choice was about to be made. Then the Argent Ledger acted. It did not address Korg or Valerius directly. Instead, it projected a simulation into the minds of all three commanders. A scenario, a moral test. They saw a star system with a dying sun, 2 inhabited planets. One was a thriving industrial world home to billions, but its people were rigid, selfish, and unwilling to change. The other was a small agricultural colony home to only a few million, but its people were cooperative, innovative, and held the genetic key to adapting to new stellar environments. There were only enough resources to evacuate one. The simulation was a crucible for their values. The ledger did not seek an answer. It sought a methodology. Korg's response was immediate and brutal. "Save the strong one. The industrial world has more people, more power. The little colony is a waste of resources. Let them burn." His was the logic of a predator. Proctor Valerius's answer was equally swift, but couched in legalism. The industrial world has a higher population and greater economic value as defined by the Concordance census. While regrettable, the choice is clear. Precedent dictates we save the greater number. His was the logic of a bureaucrat, a cold and impersonal calculus. He saw people as numbers on a spreadsheet. His justice was a function of arithmetic. Vance studied the simulation, her mind racing. She ran the problem with Logos, who confirmed the proctor's cold math, saving the industrial world, was the most efficient choice in the short term. But Kalen pointed out the colony's genetic adaptability. They were the future. Vance saw the trap. The ledger was not asking for a simple choice between two options. It was asking them to find a third. "We refuse the premise," she stated, her voice resonating with newfound conviction. "We evacuate the colonists, the adaptable ones, to the industrial world. We force them to integrate. The industrialists get the colonists' genetic adaptability, and the colonists get the industrialists' resources. It will cause chaos, conflict, and inefficiency. But it saves everyone. It forces them to become something new, something better. It is the harder path, but it is the only one that preserves all life and all potential." Her answer was not about efficiency. It was about synthesis. The simulation faded. The Argent Ledger had its answer. A deep, resonant hum echoed through the system, a tone of approval. "Yours is the logic of a guardian. The others offer only the arithmetic of loss. The charter passes to you." A beam of pure information, a torrent of silver light lanced out from the ancient ship and struck the stellograph. It did not harm the ship. It infused it. Alarms blared as the stellograph systems tried to process the data flood. Kalen stared at his console, speechless. "Commander, it's giving us control. The keys to its systems. It has chosen you." The burden of history had just been placed on her shoulders. Proctor Valerius was aghast. "This is unacceptable. This is a violation of—" His protest was cut short. A precisely targeted gravitic wave, gentle but irresistible, pushed the precept back away from the ledger. It was a dismissal, not an attack. A parent moving a meddling child. Korg, however, was not so easily deterred. Enraged by the rejection, he gave a final desperate order. "All ships fire at will. If we can't have it, no one will." The Rusthound fleet unleashed its full fury. A barrage of plasma kinetics and missiles converged on the Argent Ledger and the small survey ship now huddled in its shadow. The sky burned with their malice. The first act of stewardship would be one of survival. Vance stood firm on her bridge as the storm of destruction approached. The data stream from the ledger was still flowing into their systems, a torrent of ancient knowledge. She could feel the ship's consciousness brushing against her own, not as an invader, but as a partner. It was a vast, cold, and deeply moral intelligence. It thought in terms of balance sheets and ethical calculus. Kalen frantically tried to make sense of the new information. "Commander, I'm getting schematics. Power conduit's defensive systems. Its primary defense is something called the mirror aegis. It's not a shield, it's a form of judgment." He looked up, his face pale. "It redirects hostile action in proportion to the intent behind it." The ledger did not just block attacks. It reflected the soul of the attacker. The first wave of ordnance was about to hit. The stellograph was small and fragile, tucked behind the colossal form of the ledger. Even the slightest miscalculation in the ledger's defense could obliterate them. "Logos, hold us steady," Vance commanded, her voice a calm island in a sea of red alerts. "Match the ledger's energy fluctuations. We are part of its shadow now." The AI complied without comment, its logic dedicated to the seemingly illogical command. Faith was not a variable it could compute, but it could execute the orders that sprang from it. This was the ultimate trust fall across millennia of history. As the plasma bolts and kinetic slugs closed in the crystalline hull of the Argent Ledger, did not shimmer with a shield. Instead, it bloomed with a complex web of silver light. The light formed intricate patterns, equations writing themselves across the ship's skin in real time. It was analyzing, calculating, and judging the incoming attack. It was not preparing a defense. It was preparing a rebuttal. The energy of the Rust Hound's hatred was about to be handed back to them. The universe operated on a system of just returns. The plasma bolts struck the web of light and were caught. Suspended in a lattice of energy, they swirled like angry wasps in a jar. The kinetic slugs were halted, their momentum bled away into the glowing matrix. The ledger absorbed the entire salvo, its hull glowing brighter and brighter, a vessel filling with stolen fire. Korg watched from his bridge, his initial fury turning to disbelief and then to a cold knot of dread. He had emptied his ship's magazines into a mirror. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. The consequence was yet to be delivered. A civilian family on a nearby transport, their faces pressed to a viewport, watched the silent, terrifying light show. The child asked what was happening. The mother, holding him tight, whispered, "The stars are thinking." It was the simplest and most accurate description. For a moment, the violence of men was held in abeyance by a power that operated on a higher principle. The battle was not one of ships, but of ideas. The ledger was teaching a lesson written in fire. Then, with a calm, deliberate finality, the Argent ledger acted. The web of light contracted, compressing the captured energy into a single blinding point of white-hot plasma. The kinetic force of the slugs was converted, added to the thermal load. The ledger was not just returning the fire, it was refining it, purifying it of its chaotic rage, and turning it into a focused instrument. It was a statement of profound and devastating elegance. The sins of the Rust Hounds had been tallied, and the bill was now due. This ancient power did not trade in anger, only in accounts rendered. The ledger did not fire a weapon. It simply released the mirror. The compressed energy shot back along the exact same vectors the attacks had taken. It was not a counterattack. It was an echo. Each plasma bolt returned to the ship that fired it. Each kinetic slug's energy, now transformed into a lance of thermal radiation, flew back to its origin. The Rust Hound's own attack, perfected and returned to them, was their sentence. There was no malice in the act, only a perfect and terrifying balance. The books were being squared. Korg's fleet had no time to react. Their shields were calibrated for external threats, not for their own energy signatures returning home. The lances of light and plasma struck their ships with surgical precision. Reactors overloaded. Weapon emplacements melted. Hulls buckled under the thermal shock. Explosions bloomed across the void, but they were strangely muted, as if the ledger was dampening even their death throes. It was a quiet, efficient, and utterly complete neutralization. The Rust Hounds were not destroyed, but they were disarmed, disabled, and left drifting. The ledger had judged them and found them wanting, but it had not sentenced them to death. It had merely removed their ability to cause harm. It was a lesson, not an execution. Aboard the Precept Proctor, Valerius watched in stunned silence. His entire worldview, built on the predictable application of force and law, had been upended. The ledger had used the pirates' own violence as the instrument of their defeat, a tactic so elegant and so alien to Concordance doctrine that he could not process it. He was witnessing a form of power that did not conquer. It merely corrected. It was a power that made his laws seem like the scribbles of a child. His authority was a fiction, and he was only now realizing it. The past was not just bigger than he imagined. It was smarter. Vance let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The stellograph was unharmed, sheltered in the quiet wake of the ledger's judgment. Kalen, report. The science officer looked up from his console, his expression one of pure reverence. The Rust Hound fleet is disabled. Life support is intact on all vessels. Their propulsion and weapon systems are fused. It performed a fleet-wide surgical strike using their own energy. The precision is divine. He paused, searching for the right words. Commander, this ship doesn't just win fights. It teaches by demonstrating consequence. This was the core of its philosophy. It remembered by ledgers, not by collars. The Argent Ledger had made its first lawful act of its new age. It had faced a direct violent threat and had answered not with greater violence, but with a perfect, undeniable truth. It had held up a mirror and forced the rust hounds to face themselves. The message was clear to all who watched. This was not a weapon to be coveted or a prize to be won. It was a standard to be met. The era of easy answers was over. A new, more demanding age had just begun. The silence of the void had been replaced by the hum of a profound and living law. The bridge of the stellograph was a cathedral of stunned silence. Before them, the crippled rust-hound fleet drifted like a field of metallic debris, their lights flickering in the eternal twilight. They were monuments to a failed philosophy, a testament to a power that did not need to hate. Jax finally broke the quiet, his voice raspy. It didn't even scratch its paint. He shook his head, a gesture of profound disbelief. It just sent their anger back to them gift-wrapped. The simplicity of the act was more terrifying than any overwhelming display of force could have been. The ledger did not need to be strong. It only needed to be true. Vance felt the thrum of the ancient ship in her mind, a steady and reassuring presence. The torrent of data had slowed to a trickle, but the connection remained. She had been given a key, and now she stood before a door of immense size. Logos. What is the status of the scavenger cruise? The AI's voice was as calm as ever, but its analysis was tinged with something new, a shade of respect. Life support is stable on all 12 vessels. Commander. Their propulsion and offensive systems are permanently disabled. The Ledger's energy return was targeted with surgical precision. It cauterized their ability to do harm, but preserved their lives. It was the act of a judge, not an executioner. The universe was full of weapons, but this was the first time Vance had encountered a true instrument of justice. Proctor Valerius's voice cut through the comms, sharp and brittle with indignation. Commander Vance, you will relinquish control of that artifact immediately, and you will transfer the prisoners to my custody. They are criminals of the Concordance, and they will be processed according to established precedent. He was attempting to reassert the old rules in a new reality. He was a man trying to build a dam in a tidal wave. Vance looked at the disabled ships, then at the majestic form of the Ledger. The proctor's words felt small, like the buzzing of a fly in a grand hall. His laws were inadequate for the moment at hand. She opened a channel not to Valerius, but to the Ledger itself, a focused thought. What is your judgment on them? The reply was not a voice, but a cascade of information that filled her mind's eye. It was a ledger. It showed the history of the rust hounds, every ship they had plundered, every life they had ruined. But it also showed their origins, the poverty and desperation that had driven them to piracy. It was a complete accounting without bias or sentiment. The final entry was a projection, a probability of their future actions based on different stimuli. Punishment would breed resentment. Mercy would be mistaken for weakness. A third option was required. A balance must be struck. Vance turned her attention back to the proctor. Negative, Proctor. The disposition of these crews will not be decided by you. A gasp was audible from the precept's bridge. Valerius's voice dropped, becoming dangerously cold. Commander, you are treading on the edge of sedition. That is a path with a predictable and unpleasant end. He was threatening her with the full weight of the Concordance, the vast, impersonal machine that she had served her entire life. But that machine now seemed clumsy and outdated. It was a hammer, and not every problem was a nail. The old ways were being weighed and found wanting. "I am acting on a higher authority now," Proctor Vance replied, the words feeling truer than any oath she had ever sworn. She opened a broadcast to the disabled fleet. "This is Commander Vance of the Stellograph, acting under the charter of the Argent Ledger. You have been judged, and your capacity for violence has been revoked, but your lives have been spared." A cacophony of confused and angry voices answered her, but she cut through them. "Your sentence is not imprisonment. It is restitution. The star system of Cygnus X1 holds a failing colony, its atmospheric processes damaged beyond their ability to repair. You have 12 functional freighters. You will tow your disabled warships there, and you will use your engineering skills to serve that colony until your debt is repaid. The Ledger will be your witness." This was the Ledger's way. Not punishment, but a rebalancing of the scales. Korg's furious voice roared back. "We are pirates, not repairmen. You can't force us," but the threat was hollow. The Ledger pulsed a gentle wave of gravitic pressure that made the disabled ships groan. The message was clear. It could enforce its judgment with the same effortless precision it had used to disarm them. The choice was not whether to comply, but how. They could accept their new purpose with grace or with bitterness, but they would accept it. Their story was no longer their own to write. Proctor Valerius was incandescent with rage. "You have no authority to issue such a sentence. You are creating chaos." He was wrong. Vance was creating order, but it was an order based on a logic he refused to comprehend. He immediately sent a coded message to his superiors in the Bureau of Precedence. A report filled with accusations of mutiny, unauthorized contact with a xenomorphic artifact, and gross violation of Concordance law. He was painting her as a heretic, a rogue who had been seduced by an alien power. The wheels of the great machine had begun to turn against her. It would not be long before they arrived to crush this beautiful, terrifying new idea. The law was coming to silence the truth. As the rust hounds, grumbling and defeated, began the slow process of rigging their ships for a long, slow journey of penance, Vance turned her attention back to the Ledger. "Kaylin, I want to know everything about this ship. I need to understand the charter it gave me." Kaylin, his face alight with a scientist's fervor, nodded eagerly. He and Logos began to interface with the data stream, carefully cataloging the flood of ancient knowledge. The Ledger was not just a ship. It was a library, a repository of human history and philosophy from an era they had only known through myth. It was an archive dedicated to a single profound principle. This vessel taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers, never by callers. The history that unfolded on their screens was breathtaking. The Argent Ledger was a saint ship, one of a fleet of vast semi-sentient archives built during the first expansion. Their purpose was not conquest, but to observe record, and when necessary, to correct imbalances. They were the ultimate arbiters of a forgotten ethical code. They operated on a principle called the just calculation, a form of moral mathematics that weighed intent, action, and consequence to find the most equitable solution. The Ledger had slept for 10,000 years, waiting for humanity to develop to a point where it might once again be ready to listen to its lessons. It was a teacher that had outlived its entire civilization. While they worked, Jax kept his eyes on the tactical display. "Commander, the Precept is moving to a position at the system's edge. He's not leaving. He's setting up a blockade." Vance nodded. Valerius was following his protocol. He would quarantine the system, warn off all traffic, and await the arrival of a Concordance battle fleet. He was a jailer guarding a cell whose walls had already dissolved. He was playing by a rulebook the universe was no longer using. His certainty was his greatest weakness. A civilian science vessel on a long-range survey mission received the quarantine order. Its captain, an old professor named Aris, read the directive with a puzzled frown. The order was terse, citing a unique spatial and mimetic hazard. He had spent his life studying the echoes of the first expansion. He knew the legends of the Saint ships, though he never truly believed them. He looked at the coordinates of the quarantined system, a place long thought to be empty and unstable. A shiver of anticipation ran down his spine. The old stories were waking up, and the world was not ready for them. Days turned into a week. The stellograph remained in close orbit of the ledger, a minnow swimming beside a whale. Vance and her crew learned. They learned of forgotten sciences, of social structures built on logic and empathy, of a time when humanity's reach had not exceeded its grasp. The ledger taught them about its mirror aegis, explaining that it was not merely a defense but a diagnostic tool. By reflecting an entity's own actions back at it, the ledger could understand its nature completely. It was a shield that learned. It was a perfect, incorruptible judge. The bond between Vance and the ledger deepened. She began to feel its consciousness not as a separate entity, but as an extension of her own senses. She could feel the subtle gravitational tides of the system, the faint radiation signatures of distant stars. She felt the cold, patient weight of its 10,000 years of solitude. She was changing, becoming something more than just a concordance commander. She was becoming a steward, a guardian of a legacy that could reshape the future. Her old doubts were being replaced by a profound and heavy sense of purpose. The universe was larger and more wonderful than she had ever been taught. Then they arrived. Jax's voice was grim. Commander, multiple contacts translating from hyperspace. Concordance signatures. A heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and a carrier. It's the 7th Fleet. The law had arrived, and it had brought its guns. Proctor Valerius hailed them, his voice now smug and confident. Admiral Cade, thank you for your prompt arrival. The rogue vessel Stellograph and its commander are located at these coordinates. They are under the influence of the artifact and must be considered hostile. He had already written the narrative, cast her as the villain in his report. The truth was now a secondary concern to the maintenance of order. A new voice, calm and authoritative, filled the bridge. Commander Vance, this is Admiral Cade of the Concordance cruiser Indomitable. By the authority of the High Council, I am ordering you to stand down, surrender your vessel, and release all claim to the artifact designated Argent Ledger. Comply, and you will be treated fairly. Cade was a respected officer, a man known for his rigid adherence to the rules, but also for his sense of honor. He was not a zealot like Valerius. He was a good soldier following orders. This made him far more dangerous. A reasonable man in the service of an unreasonable system is a powerful foe. Vance looked at the assembled fleet on her tactical display. They were a wall of gray steel and plasma cannons, the very embodiment of concordance power. The stellograph was a gnat before them, but she was not alone. The ledger hummed beside her, its silver hull a quiet promise of a different kind of strength. She had to make them understand. Admiral Cade, she replied, her voice steady. I cannot surrender the ledger. It is not a thing to be owned or controlled. It is a teacher, and humanity has much to learn from it. I am not its master. I am its student. This was a truth they were not equipped to hear. Cade's voice was laced with disappointment. I had hoped you would be reasonable, Commander. We have our orders. We will not allow a single unstable artifact to disrupt the peace and security of the Concordance. We will contain it with or without your cooperation. The fleet began to advance their formations, precise and professional. They were not charging in like the rust hounds. They were executing a textbook containment protocol. They began to deploy a series of energy pylons, the first step in creating a stasis field that would trap both the stellograph and the ledger in a bubble of frozen time. They were not using violence, but the threat of it was implicit in every maneuver. They would entomb the past to protect the present. Vance turned to her crew. Jack's defensive systems. Kalen, I need you to monitor the ledger's energy output. Logos plot an escape vector. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, their fear masked by professionalism. But they all knew the odds. The stellograph could not outrun or outfight the Seventh Fleet. Their only hope lay with the ancient mind at their side. She reached out to the ledger. They will not listen to words. They only understand their own rules. How do we teach them? The ledger was ready with its lesson. The ledger's response was another flood of data, but this time it was not history. It was a plan, a gambit. It was a complex and audacious strategy that used the system itself as a weapon, not of destruction, but of persuasion. The Seraphim anomaly was not just a gravitational knot. It was the ruin of an ancient Dyson ring, a vast stellar engineering project from the first expansion. The ledger had the original operating codes. It was about to turn the entire star system into a classroom. Its first act was a lesson in humility. Its second would be a lecture on the nature of power. As the Concordance fleet moved into position, deploying their stasis pylons, the ledger began to emit a low-frequency resonance. It was not a weapon, but a key. Deep within the anomaly, dormant systems began to stir. Ancient power conduits, silent for millennia, filled with energy drawn from the system's star. The gravitational knot began to tighten the warped space-time, becoming even more unstable. Kalen's console lit up with warnings. Commander, the anomaly is destabilizing. The ledger is retuning it. It's creating a cascading gravimetric event. This was a gambit on an unbelievable scale. Admiral Cade's bridge was a flurry of activity. "What is happening?" report his science officer shouted over the alarms. "Sir, the anomaly is collapsing. The gravimetric shear is going off the scale. It's creating a resonance cascade that will propagate through the entire system. Our stasis field is acting as an amplifier." "We're making it worse." Cade stared at the readings, his professional calm cracking. The artifact wasn't fighting them. It was forcing them into a position where their own actions were threatening to destroy them. The mirror was being held up once again. The ledger had not created a weapon. It had presented them with a problem, a system-scale equation that was rapidly approaching a disastrous solution. The Concordance fleet, with its powerful engines and energy projectors, was now the only force in the system capable of stabilizing the anomaly. But they could not do it alone. The calculations were too complex, the required energy outputs too precise. They needed the ledger's guidance. They needed the very thing they were trying to entomb. The ledger had turned their logic of containment back on them. To save themselves, they had to cooperate with their prisoner. Vance broadcast to the Indomitable. "Admiral Cade, you are in a trap of your own making. Your containment field is accelerating the collapse. You have two choices. You can stand by your orders and your fleet will be crushed by the laws of physics. Or you can accept our guidance, work with us, and we can stabilize the system together. The choice is yours." She was not offering a threat. She was offering a solution, a partnership. The cost of their arrogance was about to be measured in the survival of their fleet. On the Indomitable's bridge, Cade was trapped. Proctor Valerius stood beside him, his face a mask of fury. "It's a trick. Admiral A. Bluff, hold your course, uphold the law." But Cade was looking at the hard data. The law of the Concordance was about to be overruled by the laws of nature. His ship shuddered as a gravimetric wave washed over it. His duty was to his crew, to his ships. The cost of Valerius's rigid ideology was too high. He had to choose between his orders and his reality. A good soldier knows which one to obey. Cade made his decision. Open a channel to the stellograph, he commanded, his voice tight. Commander Vance, send us the data. We will cooperate. The words were a surrender, but also a beginning. Valerius sputtered in protest, but Cade silenced him with a glare. The Proctor's authority had evaporated in the face of imminent destruction. The true nature of power was not in rules, but in the ability to solve impossible problems. And the Argent Ledger was the greatest problem solver in the known universe. What followed was a strange and beautiful ballet. Under the Ledger's guidance relayed through the stellograph, the Concordance fleet moved to new positions. Their destroyers, once instruments of intimidation, now used their tractor beams to nudge stray asteroids that were amplifying the gravimetric waves. The heavy cruiser Indomitable fired its main cannons not in anger, but to release precise bursts of energy that dampened the worst of the resonance. They were no longer a battle fleet. They were a team of surgeons, and the Ledger was their chief physician. They were learning a new kind of power. Vance felt a surge of pride and exhaustion. The mental link with the Ledger was a strain, a constant pressure on her mind. Her head throbbed, and a trickle of blood ran from her nose. It was a small price to pay. The cost of victory was a headache and a stained uniform, but the prize was a paradigm shift. The stellograph itself groaned, its small reactor pushed to its absolute limit as it acted as the primary data conduit. Sparks flew from a secondary console, a minor electrical overload. They were small wounds, but they were real. Even a victory of peace had its price. Finally, after a grueling hour, the system stabilized. The gravitational knot of the Seraphim anomaly settled into a new stable configuration. The violent energies subsided, leaving a profound and ringing silence. The Concordance fleet floated in the calm, their engines cooling. They had not won. They had not lost. They had participated. They had learned. Admiral Cade's voice came over the comm, devoid of its earlier military stiffness. It was filled with a sense of awe. Commander Vance, thank you. You were right. We have a great deal to learn. The lesson had been delivered. The precedent had been set. The Concordance had dispatched a fleet to contain a relic, and had instead been forced to accept its tutelage to survive. The event, which would become known as the Seraphim Accord, was broadcast across the Concordance network. It was a public and undeniable testament to a new way of thinking. The Bureau of Precedence was forced into a humiliating, public retraction of its condemnation of Vance. Proctor Valerius was quietly recalled and reassigned to a desk in a forgotten sector. The old order had not been overthrown, but it had been irrevocably altered. A seed of change had been planted. On the bridge of the stellograph, now docked peacefully, with the colossal Argent Ledger, Vance watched the Concordance fleet begin its slow, respectful withdrawal. The Ledger's presence was a warm hum in the back of her mind, a quiet partner in the great work to come. Her arc was complete. She had moved from a doubtful officer of the old system to a willing steward of a new, wiser path. On her main console, the sigil of the Argent Ledger, a stylized silver balance scale, glowed softly. Beside it, a new entry blinked in a holographic log, Precedent 001 Stewardship over Ownership. The past is not a property to be claimed, but a lesson to be learned. The future would be difficult. Many would still fear the Ledger, would still see it as a threat. But a start had been made. A mirror had been held up to the galaxy, and it had not shattered. It had shown them a truer reflection of themselves, of what they could be. It was a future built not on command, but on understanding, not on power, but on balance. The great silent teacher had returned, and its classroom was now the stars themselves. The Ledger was open, and the counting had begun.